Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and I want to begin this morning by apologizing for my absence yesterday. And so this morning I want to get right back to business and continuing where we left off on the program last Friday, this being Tuesday. And we're in Book 2, Chapter 2, subsection 6 on page 70 in the book, if you can follow along with me. And we'll begin reading at the top of page 70 in the History of Romanism by John Dowling. Very, very important Protestant work. And we're talking about the early superstitious notions on the merit of celibacy, on the benefit, the so-called benefit of celibacy, and the discredit of marriage. Okay, this is about the period of time that Daniel described, or rather, the Apostle Paul described as the great falling away. Okay, this is the doctrine of demons being taught, forbidding to marry and the abstaining from certain meats, which God gave for us to be thankful over. And this is the early corruption of the marriage bed. When Paul said the marriage bed is undefiled, those who are about the corruption, the great falling away, taught that marriage is discredited, and that the highest state of existence for a Christian man or woman is celibacy, or forbidding to marry, and virginity. And this is nothing, this is not at all what the Scripture teaches. This is the great falling away that we're studying, the doctrines of demons. It started very early in the Christian era. As a matter of fact, Paul was even witness to some of these false teachings even before he died. And he rebuked them, and he corrected them, and said that the marriage bed is undefiled. Okay, God created man and woman to procreate, and the bond of the marriage union is marital relations. And Paul even warned married couples, if they were going to sequester themselves for a period of time in prayer and fasting, to carefully consult one spouse to make sure they tarried not too long and that the other spouse was tempted. Okay? So we are to be continent. We are to be consistent and in the marriage bed. And it's a great joy in the marriage relationship. It's a gift from Almighty God. But the early falling away said that the state of matrimony was somehow a second or third class citizen, that somehow you've fallen from grace. Okay? This is when they made sex dirty. Okay? They made God a dirty old man. And it's not to be believed, but yet it is still believed today, some of these early false teachings. And it causes great pain in Christian marriages, even to this day, that somehow sex is to be a part of the marriage only for procreation, and that if the intent is not there to procreate, then there is no sex. Okay? This is not what Paul taught. And there are others teachings or sentiments that are secretly and even publicly held by Christians, that sex is just a marital duty, but it's not to be enjoyed. That somehow it is, well, less than Christian. Some suggest that there are only limited circumstances under which a married couple can engage sexually. And there are only specific ways that they can engage sexually. All of these are corruptions that came out of the first centuries right after Paul died. And they found, and their origin is found even before Paul died. All right, all of these errors are concentrated in the Roman Catholic Church. As a matter of fact, they've written volumes and volumes under the title of moral theologies. Moral theologies that place unlimited restrictions and rules and regulations between a man and woman who are married, and they are nowhere to be found in the Scriptures. Absolutely nowhere to be found in the Scriptures. This is man-made religion, okay? It's not Christianity. It's popery. It's the great falling away that led to the establishment of the Roman Catholic Church. And this is why the priests and the nuns of the Roman Catholic Church practice celibacy and chastity even today. And this is also why the laity of the Roman Catholic Church view their priests, their celibate priests, as somehow divine or above the human frailty. Okay, this is where they achieve a godlike status. This is why they are revered in the Roman Catholic churches as though they were vicars of God. Okay, now the author says in subsection 6, it is painful to reflect at how early a period unscriptural notions in relation to celibacy and marriage began to prevail among the professed followers of Christ. Okay? Listen, the greatest gift God gave to man and woman is the marital relationship. I mean, who can doubt? God gave it as a gift to be enjoyed freely between God-fearing man and woman in marriage. It's the tie that binds. Now, if it is so valuable in the man and wife relationship, what do you think Satan's position of it would be? To destroy it and reduce it from that holy gift that God gave man and woman into something filthy. Okay? In Satan's world, black is white and white is black. Good is evil and evil is good. So the best gift that God gave to man, short of our salvation in Christ Jesus, is the marriage relationship and marital union between a man and his wife. And Satan sought early on to destroy it and to make it something filthy. And he capitalized all of his efforts right after the apostles died. And all of its errors are found within the Roman Catholic Church. And it has corrupted all of Christianity's views about sexuality, human sexuality between a man and a wife. Again, he says, it is painful to reflect how early a period unscriptural notions in relation to celibacy and marriage began to prevail among the professed followers of Christ. Even in the time of Tertullian, who flourished about the commencement of the 3rd century, the notion had gained some strength that celibacy, that is, the forbidding to marry, we're talking about two things, celibacy, the forbidding to marry, and chastity, abstaining from sex. Okay? Now, theoretically, one could be married, that is, not living the celibate life, but engaging in sex. In other words, he's celibate, but he's not chaste. Now, that describes most of the Roman Catholic priesthood. I mean, they stand before the world unmarried. They have no spouse. They say Christ is their spouse. And they go around pollinating every little flower they can find, even if it's a little boy. Okay? So they're celibate, but they're not chaste, are they? All right? Here, this is the globally exposed evidence of the sexual corruption of the Roman Catholic Church, which began in the earliest days of the Christian era. It says, in the time of Tertullian, who flourished about the commencement of the 3rd century, the notion had gained some strength that celibacy was highly meritorious. In other words, you could earn grace. You could earn grace by forbidding to marry. You could earn God's favor by forbidding to marry. And that matrimony was a dishonor and a discredit. Okay? The 3rd century, all of a sudden it became popular, the belief that celibacy was a meritorious work. You could gain heaven by being celibate. And that matrimony, being married, was somehow dishonorable and discredited. That somehow you had fallen from a higher state if you got married. So what does that do to a newly married man and woman, both fruitful, both continent, and all of a sudden a little demon stands up on their shoulder and whispers in their ears and says, "You're a second-class citizen. What you're doing is wrong. What you're doing is filthy. It's not the highest state for man and woman. And every time you engage in this act, you lower yourself from heaven." Okay? So what does a young virgin do with that notion? She's married. Divorce is universally frowned upon. So she's stuck in this marriage relationship, but she must remain chaste. But something happens. This desire to, even though they're married, to be chaste and non-sexual in the relationship seems all well and good. I mean, that's what the early church fathers said was the ultimate state of existence, chastity. But you're married, and the needs of your spouse are not quenched. But it's unlawful or somehow demeaning or somehow dirty and sinful to engage in that marital act. So what happens? One or the other or both the spouse seek satisfaction outside the marriage. Now Satan has destroyed the marriage. This is exactly why Satan, these doctrines of demons, crept into the church to make a mockery of God's people, to make that which God created to be holy and to be enjoyed and to be used in the marriage family, and turned it into filth. And of course, if the conscience will not let one engage in that which is right and good, and the body's needs won't be quenched, then sin lieth at the door. And this is the destruction of marriages from this time on to the present time. This unbiblical understanding about the marriage union. That somehow we're second-class citizens. That somehow, even though we're married, we're not to enjoy the marriage relationship. We're not free to enjoy the blessing that God gave us, because somehow God was a dirty old man when he created sex. God was a dirty old man when he created marriage. And he led us astray by creating marriage. So Satan has literally taken over the whole institution of marriage and corrupted it. And that's the state of the marriage relationship in the Christian home even today. You can blame Rome for this. You can blame Satan for this. Even in the time of Tertullian, who flourished about the commencement of the 3rd century, the notion that gained some strength that celibacy was highly meritorious and that matrimony, marriage, was a dishonor and a discredit. Hence, when dissuading from second marriages, this earliest of Latin ecclesiastical writers uses the following language. Listen to what he says. Quote, May it not suffice thee to have fallen from that high rank of immaculate virginity by once marrying, and so descending to a second stage of honor? Must thou yet fall further, even to a third and to a fourth, and perhaps yet even lower? Unquote. So, in this quote, you have fallen from the highest state by marrying in the first place. Must you descend even further by divorcing and remarrying a second and a third and possibly even a fourth time? You see the attitude here? This is unscriptural. It's the influence of demons upon the holy God-given institution of marriage. It is Satan making that beautiful gift that God gave his people, men and women, married, bound in marriage, and turning it into filth. He says these unscriptural opinions were owing in part to the superstitious notions which began to prevail at a very early period in relation to the influence of malignant demons. Okay? So there you hear from the author's own mouth exactly what I've been telling you. He says it was an almost general persuasion, says Mosheim, the church historian, that they who took wives were, of all others, the most subject to demonic influence. Okay? So if you took a wife, if you got married, you had fallen under Satan's influence. Now, what has Satan just done to the most precious gift that God gave man outside of salvation? He's turned it into a sin. That which is holy has now become sinful. And it's become the teaching of this early apostasy, this great falling away that Paul predicted. He continues, he says, and as it was of infinite importance to the interest of the church that no impure or malevolent spirit entered into the bodies of such as were appointed to govern or to instruct others, in other words, the priests and the popes, so the people were desirous that the clergy should use their utmost efforts to abstain from the pleasures of the conjugal life. Okay? So if the holiest state of existence for man is celibacy, that is not married, and chaste, that is asexual, no sex, then that's what they demanded of the priests. That the priests be unmarried and unsexual. Now that's the most holy, isn't it? And everyone in the congregation who have fallen into marriage and engage in this lustful, sinful, conjugal life, they somehow must look up to the priest as a better example and as one more qualified to teach and to instruct and to admonish the lowly sinners. Right? You see how this is going? He says the natural consequence of the prevalence of opinions like these was that unmarried men began to be regarded as far more suitable for the office of the sacred ministry than such as had contracted the defilement of matrimony. In a short time, second marriages were, by many, condemned in any case, and were regarded as wholly inconsistent with the purity of the sacred office, and therefore entirely inadmissible as in the clergy. In other words, there was a mild acceptance, though grudging, of anyone entering the clergy, anyone entering the priesthood that was married. But if they divorced or they lost their spouse, there would be no second marriage. Okay, they were going to put their beliefs into practice. No married priests. Now, we know of Paul, who chose celibacy, who chose not to marry, and who we must believe was also chaste, unsexual. He did it by choice. He did it with prayer and supplication. And we have to believe that since there was no scandal in Paul's life, that God granted him grace and relieved him of his natural, God-given desires so that he could serve the Lord in the capacity that he did. But now we're talking about men forcing celibacy and chastity upon men in the clergy. Do you see an opportunity for Satan here? Absolutely. And that's what we see in the newspapers, on television, in the global press. Priest and papal debauchery. And it has been a fixture in the Roman Catholic Church. It's not a new development. It has been a permanent fixture in the Roman Catholic priesthood from day one. And the world makes exception for it. Outraged by it, yes, but they don't demand that righteousness be done. And they allow these clergy to be sequestered off into resort facilities for rehabilitation, or even shipped off to the Vatican to be protected. This is the extent to which these early errors have gone, even in our day. Not to mention the incalculable disappointments, betrayals, divorces, and even murders among Christian married couples because of the restrictions and the dirty feelings that this early abomination had upon the institution of marriage. It's a corruption that is as old as the falling away is old. And it's time for us to admit our error and repent of Rome's influence and enjoy the gift that God gave men and women bound together in matrimony. Look, if there was no shame, if there was no crime to be committed in the marriage bed of a lawfully wed Christian man and woman, there would be no sin. There would be no adultery. There would be no fornication. There would be no illicitness. There would be no dirt. And sex between a man and his wife would be what God fully intended it to be from the very beginning. A celebration. A blessing. Something to be looked forward to. Not something to be denied and to be ashamed of. Why do we let Rome continue to destroy, next to our own salvation, the greatest gift that God gave man and woman? The author says, it is refreshing amidst these dawnings of early corruption to hear a contemporary of Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, raising a voice in a Protestant style of remonstrance against this shocking fanaticism, pointing it out as a characteristic of Antichrist and of the great apostasy of the latter days, that there should be those who would, quote, forbid to marry and command to abstain from meats, unquote. Quote, what, says he, may not self-command be preserved under the conditions of the married life? May not marriage be used and yet continence be respected without our attempting to sever that which the Lord hath joined? God allows every man, whether priest, deacon, or layman, to be the husband of one wife, and to use matrimony without being liable to censure, unquote. In other words, to engage in marital relations with no guilt. God allows every man, whether a priest, deacon, or layman, to be the husband of one wife and to use matrimony, that is, to engage in the marital relationship without being liable to censure, without being liable to guilt. That's the voice of Protestantism. Clement of Alexandria stood up against Tertullian and all these fallen so-called saints of the Roman Catholic Church and told the Protestant the biblical truth. Every man is allowed. Even the Apostle Paul was allowed to take a wife. Did Paul not say so? Marriage is the highest state. The sexual relationship between a man and his spouse is undefiled. There's no sin, there's no shame, there's no restriction. There's not one restriction in the Bible. It's all man-made. All of the guilt is man-made. No, rather, it is the doctrine of demons. To turn that which God created to be enjoyed, that which God created to be holy, that which God created to be a blessing and a bond between a man and his wife, Satan has turned it into filth. And we allow it to happen without protest. Oh, I'm protesting this morning. Clement of Alexandria was right. God allows every man, whether priest, deacon, or layman, even the Apostle Paul, I will add, to be the husband of one wife and to use matrimony without guilt, without being subject to censure, that is, punishment or restriction. God placed no censure on the marriage bed. Only man did, and only men who were under the influence of Satan and his demons. Now he continues, he says, this instance of good sense and scriptural reasoning amidst the increasing corruption on this point is the more remarkable as it stands alone. In other words, this great saint of God stood up against the masses. He stood alone in defense of the institution of marriage and the marriage relationship. He stood against the great falling away. He was the single solitary voice in favor of the Scriptures regarding marriage. Think of the courage it would take this man to stand up, Clement of Alexandria, to stand up against the masses and this newfangled new thing that the priests were to be celibate, that is, unmarried and chaste, a higher order, the greatest state of existence, virgins, and that everyone else were to be regarded as fallen, somehow giving in to sinful lust. In other words, God is a dirty old man, and the priests are like God, celibate, unmarried. Now, this is why we see such arrogance among the priesthood of the Roman Catholic Church. That's how they can stand before congregations. That's how they can stand before governments. That's how they can stand before presidents and kings and look down their long, sinister noses at the filth as though they were somehow better, when the the newspapers are full of the debauchery of the priests. This high and mighty status of the priests of the Roman Catholic Church and other churches is contradicted by the well-known and the ancient fixture of sexual depravity among the clergy. And it's time for us to address it, and its very cause, and call it for what it is: doctrines of demons. The highest state for a man and woman is marriage, and a continual, consistent, loving sexual relationship. Now he says, this instance of good sense and scriptural reasoning in Clement of Alexandria, amidst the increasing corruption, the great falling away on this point, is the more remarkable as it stands alone, a single star amongst the surrounding darkness. Quote, so far as I know, says Mr. Taylor, Clement of Alexandria is the only extant writer of the early ages who adheres to common sense and apostolical Christianity. Through and through, he says, those who at a later date ventured to protest against the universal error were instantly cursed and put down as heretics by all the great divines of their times, and were in fact deprived of the means of transmitting their opinions to be more equitably judged by their posterity. In other words, Clement of Alexandria got by with his condemnation of this great falling away and this emphasis on chastity and celibacy. But those who followed after him in his example and held to a scriptural understanding of marriage and the marital relationship, they were condemned as heretics. If you were to stand up and say, like Clement of Alexandria, that every man is given the right, whether he be a priest, a deacon, or a layman, to be the husband of one wife and to use his marriage without censure, you were deemed a heretic. And what did this early church say about heretics? It was a meritorious work to kill heretics, that you could earn grace and favor with God by killing heretics. That's the entire history of the Roman Catholic Church. Okay? Anybody comprehend now who the great Antichrist of Scripture is? Who the beast is? History reveals it to us with every bit of assurance as the Bible assures us that Jesus is the Christ. History and the Bible assure us that the papacy is the Antichrist and the result of the great falling away that we're talking about, the doctrines of demons. This is why I call the Roman Catholic Church the synagogue of Satan. Satan has a heyday in the Roman Catholic Church, and he makes good Bible-believing Christians feel guilty about the great gift that God gave to man. Subsection 8. In the time of Cyprian, the celebrated bishop of Carthage, who suffered martyrdom in AD 258, the vow of perpetual celibacy was taken or enforced upon multitudes of young women, and his pen was frequently employed to reproving or correcting the numerous scandals and irregularities which naturally sprang from this fruitful source of illicit indulgence. Okay? What does the author here tell us about all the young women who became nuns in the Roman Catholic Church as a result of this prohibition of the enjoyment of marriage and the marriage relationship? That it was somehow dirty, so women took vows of perpetual chastity and perpetual celibacy, became nuns, and they were plagued with scandals and irregularities because of this illicit indulgence that results because you can't quench the desire. It's God-given. Okay? So while they profess to be nuns, profess to be perpetual virgins and chaste, they committed sin. Illicit indulgence in sex. So the nuns were plagued with scandal. This is what you can automatically know about a nunnery. A bunch of women all together who have sworn to forego human sexuality, forego marriage, as though that was the lesser state of existence. And they take vows to be perpetual virgins. And illicit indulgence characterizes every one of them. Okay? You make that which God created to be enjoyed and to be pleasurable and to be holy in the marriage bed, and you turn it into filth. That's what nunneries are, dens of filth, just as monasteries are dens of filth. Nunneries are filled with chaste virgins, perpetual virgins that cannot control their desires, and the monasteries are full of priests and monks who too swear to forego the natural pleasures of life, marriage and the marriage relationship, and they are plagued with these illicit debaucheries. And likewise the popes, the bishops, the priests, the cardinals, the archbishops, the nuns. It is indeed, as I claim, as the Scriptures attest, as history proves, the Roman Catholic Church is the synagogue of Satan, completely possessed with the doctrines of demons. And their debaucheries are legion. They are a permanent fixture in the Roman Catholic Church. Nothing will ever be done to stop the sexual depravity of the priests, monks, and nuns of the Roman Catholic Church, short of Christ's literal return and his destruction of the synagogue of Satan. Nothing's ever going to be done. Now you hear all this talk about, well, the reason the priests have this problem is because they're forbid to marry. So if you allow the priest to marry, you won't have this problem anymore. But they're never going to allow their priests to marry. Now, I'm tempted to get into a big dissertation about Romans chapter 1, but my regular listeners have heard it so many times they can recite it by heart. The real reason why they are lesbian and sodomites, homosexuals among the priests and the nuns, is because of their idolatry. Romans chapter 1 lays it out in no uncertain terms. But they make that which God created to be celebrated and enjoyed between a man and a wife, they make it filthy. And they suffer the punishment. Okay? Now, addressing this description of female devotees, he says in one of his epistles, quote, "Listen then to him who seeks your true welfare, lest, cast off by the Lord, ye be widows before being married. Adulteresses, not to your husbands, but to Christ. And after having been destined to the highest rewards, you undergo the severest punishments. For consider, while the 100-fold produce is that of martyrs, the 60-fold is yours. And as they, the martyrs, condemn the body and its delights, so should you. Great are the wages which await you, if faithful, the high reward of virtue, the great recompense to be conferred upon chastity. Not only shall your lot and portion in the future life be equal to that of the other sex, but ye shall be equal to the angels of God." Unquote. So, you blessed virgins of the Lord, you nuns, you're going to be equal with the angels of God if you maintain your celibate state and your refusal to engage in the bodily pleasures and delights of marriage. You see how beautiful Satan's words are? Not only shall your lot and portion in the future life be equal to that of the other sex, but you shall be equal to the angels of God. Isn't that one of the temptations that Satan leveled against Adam and Eve in the garden? For God doth know that you eat of the fruit of the tree, you shall be as gods. Satan used the same enticements against the nuns to be equal with God if they abstain from marriage and sex. And continue, of course, in your illicit debaucheries. See what a confusing mess Satan makes of the truth. And how widely acceptable it is among mankind. At least those who are not well read in the Scriptures. Now, these female devotees have ever since been distinguished by the name nuns, and in the Latin, nona, a word said to be of Egyptian origin and to satisfy a virgin, or rather to signify a virgin. Okay? To say the word nun is to say the word virgin. Okay? In after ages, a variety of ceremonies were observed and still continue to be observed upon a female taking upon herself the vow of perpetual chastity, or, quote, taking the veil, unquote, as it is now called. The first of the adjoining plates, that's some woodcuts here in the book, it says the first of the adjoining plates represents the crowning of professed nuns with what is called, quote, the crown of virginity, unquote, during which ceremony the anthem is sung, Veni Sponsi Christi, etc., which means, quote, come, O spouse of Christ, and receive the crown, unquote. In former times, it was customary to place a crown upon the heads of those who died virgins, and this custom is still observed in some popish countries. You know where this tradition came from? Heathen nations. It was all adopted in the Roman Catholic Church in order to bring the heathens into the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church adopted every pagan ritual, every pagan holiday, every pagan observance, even the observance of nunneries and monkeries from the pagan world. They just baptized it and made it Christian. Okay? That's why it's the synagogue of Satan. It has its origins in ancient Babylon. And those errors were passed down to ancient Persia and through Greece and finally culminating in Rome. That's why it's called Mystery the Great in the Bible. The mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. It's speaking of the Roman Catholic Church. The author says the other plate, there's two woodcuts here in the book. We're coming upon them rapidly here. The other plate represents the reading by the official priests of the anathema against false nuns, in other words, nuns who have fallen from grace and have either gotten married or engaged in sex, usually with a priest, a most awful curse against such as should violate their vows of virginity and against all who should endeavor to seduce them from their vow or should seize upon any portion of their wealth. So we're going to see woodcuts here in the book of those who are taking the vow of chastity and celibacy, taking the veil, and a similar woodcut of those who are being read the riot act by the Pope for falling from their angelic position as virgins. All right? Subsection 9. But to return to our narrative, the next step in this pernicious innovation, after the prohibition of second marriages to the clergy, was to forbid them to marry at all after ordination. A decree to this effect was passed at a council held in Ankara in Galatia in AD 314. Now listen to this. This is 314 AD. By this decree, all ministers were forbidden to marry after ordination. After they were ordained as priests, they were forbidden to marry, except in the case of those who at the time of their ordination made an explicit profession of their intention to marry, and as being their case unavoidable. Okay, there was an exception. In such a case, listen to this, in such a case, a license was granted to the candidate to marry, and securing him from future censures for doing so. Yeah, we've got an idea. If they're going to marry after their ordination, they got to have a license. In other words, an indulgence. The Pope is going to turn his head the other way and sign a license agreement with the offending priest and giving him permission, obviously for money. Licenses cost money, don't they? And that will give him license to marry. In all my researches over the years, 20 years or so, close to 20 years of investigating the history of the Roman Catholic Church, this is the first mention, the earliest mention of the Roman Catholic Church issuing licenses to get married. And I've never heard of a case of licensing marriage prior to this account. Abraham didn't need a license to get married. Adam and Eve didn't need a license to get married. There's no recollection in all of my studies of any license to get married. I mean, after all, why does one need a license to do that which is lawful and laudable? There's no licensing of marriage in God's house. To license a marriage is to give the authority of the marriage to someone other than Christ. And that's what the papacy is. An authority other than Christ who arrogates to himself the head of every marriage, and that as being the head of every marriage, he must issue a license. Because he's not the lawful marriager. So if you have a license, you don't have God's sanction for marriage, you have a man's sanction for marriage, and that man is the man of sin, the head of the church. I'll be back tomorrow.